and sustainable development in Africa hinges on industrialization, which holds the key to creating jobs, eradicating poverty, and improving people's living standards. Now these are powerful, this is a very powerful statement, because you never hear a Western leader going to Africa and say, you should build industries, you should build nuclear power, you should build highways and high-speed railways. It never happened. This is the difference. This is where the big contradiction is emerging, because the Europeans and the United States, they think the Chinese are spoiling the Africans, giving them false hopes that they too can become industrial nations. But that's possible. China did it. China was much more poor than the majority of African nations in the 1960s. So there are many reports now coming out of China's involvement in Africa, facts that China is the largest trade partner with Africa. It has, and the trade is increasing every day by 20%. Chinese direct investments is also, it's not the largest yet, because as I said, the United States and Britain are the largest, but it's increasing by 40% every year. China is the largest source of construction financing for many African infrastructure plans. Also, China is building industry, and this is a very important point, which the Chinese leaders and President Xi Jinping has made clear. China does not want to continue to be the world's factory. You know, why should China produce shoes and clothing for people in Africa when Africa can produce it themselves? Because these are low-value products with high price of pollution, for example. But African nations can start producing their own clothes and shoes, as Ethiopia is now doing, but by providing Ethiopia with shoe and clothing factories, modern factories where the Ethiopians now produce and export both for their own needs, but exporting for the rest of the world. And China will provide high-value, high-technology products instead of shoes and clothing to the rest of the world. And it's transforming China's relationship to the world economy. Now, this is one of the ideas we have in the report, and I think the gentleman who asked about the magnetic levitated trains, it's our choice of course, our choice of technology for transport. But what's available now is this map, and this is one of the tragedies of Africa. This map was produced by the African Union in 1982 to connect all the African nations together with highways. And everybody was. The problem is that Africa did not have the tools at the time, 40 years ago, to build these themselves. Now, the ones who had the tools, which is the United States and Europe, there was no help in construction. So the Prime Minister of China in 2014 was in Africa, Prime Minister Li Keqiang, and he pledged to cooperate with the African nations to build high-speed rail to connect all the major capitals of Africa. Now, this is not a Chinese idea originally. This is an African idea. But with the help of China and the Belt and Road, now it can become true. And very efficiently and very quickly, China has managed to build not high-speed rail, but standard gauge railway. It took only 3 years to build the first major railway from Djibouti to Addis Ababa, which is very important for Ethiopia, for Ethiopia's development and trade with the world. Have the Mombasa-Nairobi railway, also built in 3 years, with the China Export-Import Bank financing the majority of it. And now the skepticism, which was very dominating actually even in Africa towards China, is now disappearing. Now there is openness towards China. And all these plans, this East African Master Plan has also been in place for many, many years, but nobody helped build it. And now China is helping building it. And most importantly, the landlocked countries who have enormous costs for transport of goods to their country and exporting, they will have enormous relief. We have advocated for many years this Lake Chad. This is the original size, but Lake Chad has been disappearing. It's only 10% of what it was. We have advocated a project produced by an Italian engineering company. It's called Transaqua, to build a canal, which is 2,600 kilometers long, to bring some of the water, 5% of the water of the Congo River, downstream downstream into the Chari River and to refill the Lake Chad, where 30 million people now are threatened. Many people are immigrating inside Africa. Many people, young people, are immigrating outside Africa because there's no more living there. And Boko Haram, the terrorist organization, is very active recruiting young people in that region because the Boko Haram have resources of financing. So this would solve, but this was rejected by the European Commission when we presented. And now last year, finally, China Power and the Italian company finally came to an agreement to start studying this. Not an agreement to build it, but an agreement to study it. And the Italian government actually supports this idea. So this is the idea is that we need mega projects, large-scale projects in Africa to bring Africa out of poverty. This is the Grand Inga Dam, which has been on the drawing boards for decades. It would produce 40,000 megawatts of power. That's twice as much as the Three Gorges Dam in China. And it will provide electricity for millions and millions of people in the Congo and in Africa, in the surrounding region. Now, there is resistance in Europe and the United States to this project, but China has finally also expressed interest to work on this project. We have the South African high-temperature nuclear reactor technology, which is developed inside South Africa. It's a fantastic opportunity for South Africa to have its indigenous nuclear industry, but it needs a lot of support, because ultimately you cannot continue, when Africa grows, you cannot continue to use fossil fuels. Hydropower will reach its capacity. The only solution will be nuclear power. And this is a big issue when you talk about nuclear power in Africa, here in Europe, because we are not even building in Europe. We are against nuclear power in spite of the fact that most of our electricity comes from nuclear power. But we are rejecting that idea now. But China is moving ahead. Africa is moving ahead. Now, this is my conclusion here is, if you look, this is a real picture of Africa by night, taken by NASA satellites. Completely dark, just small enclaves here and there. Lack of electricity. Now, this is a map of a vision of Africa 2050, which I asked a friend of mine to draw based on our proposal. It's not a complete, correct picture, but it's a vision. Now, by 2030, 49% of all population growth will take place in West Asia and Africa. Africa will add 1.3 billion people to the world population by 2050. Now, many people who live in the old paradigm think that this is a problem. But if you think with the Chinese idea, it's a challenge, but it's also a great source of wealth, because the majority of the people in Africa will be very young people with a median age of 23, while the rest of the world will be old people. So Africa will be the youngest place on earth, but also the greatest market on earth for economic development, for all kinds of investment. And this is the challenge for Sweden and Europe. That's why I call Sweden, China, and Sweden, Europe, China plus X. Africa is the X. Because there is so much needed in Africa that it's a perfect place to start. As President Xi Jinping said, you know, China achieved in 2 decades what it took the Western world 100 years. Why? Because you don't go back to the technologies of the Industrial Revolution of the 17th century. You start building with the latest technologies, which will make your development at a much, much higher speed. So you don't go back and reinvent the wheel. You start with the latest technologies available. And that's where the challenge is for us. That's where there's skepticism towards China. Because we have abandoned this idea of industrial development, technological development. And as President Xi Jinping says, history is made by courageous people. And courageous also means you have to have visions and have the courage to abandon obsolete and failed ways of working and thinking. Thank you very much.